Hello everyone, welcome back. The second entry here in the video series, I'm doing 10 kind of new brews, so don't expect to see too much meta decks that you've seen before. I'm trying to break the mold and experiment with some new things here, again, all in preparation for the European Challenge, which is only, as of recording this here now, about 3 weeks away. And of course North America, which we'll have more time for and more data for, so most of this is going to be in the context of the European Challenge and decks that you can maybe use to get through that last chance qualifier, take some of your opponents by surprise, and get yourself a ticket there to the championship, which hopefully we'll get some more details on soon. But let's dive right in here. Again, not going to waste any time because we have a lot to cover. And again, even though we're only going through 10 full decks here, we're going to go through more in the coming weeks, and especially leading up to the week itself of the championship. We'll have some data for the European Championship. There's going to be the online Pixelborn Connect tournament, North America versus Europe. So maybe check out some of the decks that the more popular European players are playing there to have a better idea of what people might play when you actually attend. But let's go here now. And first off, everyone's kind of favorite here, kind of rounding out some of the more aggressive decks, a new take on the hyper aggro. We got a couple new tools to help utilize in this set, and a little bit of a different way to approach the deck than we did before. Previously, we saw Amethyst Chronomicon. I'm a little bit down on that card as of late. I do think it's a little slow, and I think the people's decks are becoming more and more refined. And again, we've gone through a lot of decks here on this channel, and more of them are becoming aggressive. Amethyst Chronomicon's not a card you want in an aggressive matchup, so I've swapped out the Chronomicons for Rapunzel, gifted with healing. But to start off here, some of the new cards, Diablo. I can't remember the name of that one exactly, but the Azure one, that's kind of like a Cusco. When it dies in any which way, you get to draw a card, another good addition. I think it's better than Broom. It did replace Broom in this deck. Just because Broom is something you often wanted to quest with, and then you have to make some sort of thing happen for you to keep going with it. You have to play a character, which is pretty easy to do in this deck, but I think amount of 1-drops I want in this deck is around 24, and that I think was the worst one of them. I wanted to keep all the 2 lore ones, the Maleficent, Lilo, and Daisy Duck. Chernobog's Followers I still think is the best one, and Pascal has the ability to get more than 1 lore pretty easily with just, staying in play, having evasive, and pretty solid. Of course, not that great in the face of opposing Emerald Diablos, Pascal that is, but overall, I think it's a good enough choice to include here. No one's surprised at all. Lilo is just going to make an appearance in every kind of aggressive deck that is playing Amber. One of the reasons to play Amber, the 2-cost Lilo that comes back over and over again, and another reason I don't think you need Amethyst Chronomicon is because you have a way to use all your ink over and over again with Lilo, so you don't need extra cards. You have something kind of set up there that if it ever dies, you can bring back repeatedly. Going back to the Baloo/Piglet kind of line there, where we have a bunch of 3-cost cards, which are kind of our backup plans, our secondary effects there. You can kind of count Meta Mim Snake as a 3-cost card. You don't really want to be playing it on turn 2 if you can help it. You'd much rather even just play a second 1-drop than pick up your 1-drop, unless it's going to die, and you want to challenge something like a Cinderella, the Singing Cinderella on 1, and Steel Song, which of course you probably just want to dodge. But all these 3-cost cards give you more inherent lore. Baloo is kind of an additional way to close the game. You'll see there are 16 cards in the deck which gain lore immediately. Not immediately. There are 12 cards which gain immediately, and Baloo and Donald Duck do so in context of having more characters in play with Donald Duck's ability, protecting something else in play, and Baloo if it trades in any which way. Then you get 2 lore out of the deal. You can always just quest with it. They don't have to interact with it. That's one way to get around Baloo. If you're the opposing character, just kind of leave it there for a turn. It gains 1 lore twice. They can always challenge with it, even though it has 0 strength. But yeah, Baloo's a fine inclusion there. Again, trying to really hammer home the burn package, and in doing so, we have one of the newer cards, the White Rose. I think it's Jewels of the Garden. It does kind of only gain 1 lore, but I do think it's worth the inclusion here. Sorry about that. I do think it's worth the inclusion. It's a solid body that you want to play out there. You could play something like Maleficent, the one that draws a card. It's not really what this deck's overall game plan is. Gaining lore is the name of the game. And while getting extra card is nice, getting extra lore is usually more important. And some decks can lock you out of the game from being able to quest anything for the rest of the game. Literally, they just stop you from ever getting ahead in any which way. And the White Rose, Merlin Goat, and Gathering Knowledge and Wisdom are really the cards that you use to close the game out. Rarely do you want to ink Merlin and Gather. You can't obviously ink Gather, but rarely do you want to ink Merlin because it is a good way to help close the game. White Rose, to a lesser degree, it's not an uninkable card in my mind. There are plenty of those already in the deck. I think there's 20, which again, this deck will always run a higher amount than anything else because the ones it wants to play are the ones that it plays early, so it's never really uninkable stuck in your hand. They're the better cards. But the White Rose is a great inclusion. You could do something like play locations. I've seen a lot of people play the library in decks like this too. That's fine. I do think this is, again, the more aggressive approach, and the more aggressive the metagame does become. And with cards like Moana, which we've seen before in a lot of the Ruby decks, and we'll see in a couple here coming right up, it is pretty susceptible to being challenged. I don't expect cards to live as long. And even against the Steel decks, Pluto, again, one of the better cards I think that is in the set for Steel. I think those are the two best cards in those colors. I have a little graphic as to what I think is the best ones I posted on Twitter about the best cards in each color. But you can go check that out there if you want to. I made a little loud statement about it. But yeah, I do believe that Moana is the best Ruby card. I believe Pluto is the best Steel card in the set. Not to say that other ones won't see play, that some other ones maybe are more powerful, but those are the best ones I think as far as widespread inclusion in decks. But anyway, back to the deck here. Overall game plan has remained pretty much the same. This is more an updated version of the deck, utilizing Diablo, Lilo, and the White Rose to really kind of go longer, give you more resiliency, and that's really what the deck has lacked in the long term. It's really lacked the ability to go long. It can, it got a little bit of burst with that Gather Knowledge and Wisdom, but the White Rose in complement with this set I think might be enough to push it over the edge there. And while you're still going to have an issue with Cinderella and Storm, let Storm Rage on, I think that blow is somewhat lessened. And again, looking to not only what I've already posted for different variations of Steel Song, a lot of decks are moving away from being as song-based, more aggressive to help combat some of the more controlling decks like Sapphire, and that might be where the metagame shifts to, in which case we'll see a huge dance and then everything will then go back to the way it was, but we'll see how it goes. I don't expect that to be the case, but who knows. People do get lazy and just play what they like. So moving on, this one's there to keep. I like keeping this deck built. I have a copy of it proxied up, ready to go. I have all the real cards there, but then I have the new ones kind of left in there, because I like to use this deck as a test for the format. If your deck really has no chance at this, you really need to justify, what else you were doing. If you were not able to race this deck or remove anything, it's a good test to just say, hey, I know that this deck exists. I need to make sure I can contend with it because the potential to play against it. Am I really, if I can't beat this type of deck, am I playing the right type of deck that can beat everything else, or should I maybe try this deck out? And it's a really good one. I've had a lot of fun playing it. I don't mind aggressive decks. I don't like to think that aggressive decks require less skill. That's never really the case. They have a shorter decision tree, not a wide decision tree, so the decisions often seem like they don't matter, but the ones that do matter really, really matter. So you don't get as many decisions because the game doesn't go as long if all goes as planned, but there are some critical ones, and a single misstep can certainly cost you the game. That's always true of aggro decks. And this game particularly, it seems to be a little bit more harsh on aggressive decks because they would run away pretty quickly with the game if left unchecked in any kind of way, like one-cost answers to things. That's why Daisy Duck sees as much play as it does. Really nothing on turn one that does answer it. The best you can do is turn 2 cards, whether it be cards like Gaston, the 4-2 and Ruby, which still you get some questing out of the deal. But happy this deck exists. I would always keep a deck like this sleeved up just in case you need to practice, and a good test to see if your deck can even keep up. But moving along here, one of the more fun decks we'll get to, and we've seen variations of like this do well at some kind of challenges recently. Less pirate themed because we didn't have as many, but here we go. Ruby Steel Pirates. This is kind of my first initial take on the deck. We got a lot to take in here. So we're seeing, again, the package of Moana and Wendy Darling, and I've talked about that in other Ruby pairings where the amount of pirates was a little bit lacking. Not the case for Ruby Steel. That's the one where the pirates are at an all-time high. We have Moana, we have Happy, and Doc, of course. Those are kind of a key package there. You'll see it in a lot of the decks. Again, I've tried out a lot of things, and Seven Dwarfs Mine is really, really good. Not only, again, did I mention it checks cards like Oswald, but also Lilo. Lilo is an important threat to have to deal with, and if you have the ability to move Happy and Doc around off the location, on the location, to whichever location you want, you can answer those things indefinitely. So while it does seem like it is difficult to answer some threats like that sometimes, you certainly can, and it's all about how you build your deck. Calhoun especially, 3-2 in Steel, resist 1. Well, resist 1 is all the strength that Lilo has, so Calhoun's a pretty good counter to Lilo in a lot of ways too. I do expect to see Calhoun as one of the more played Steel decks. I still think that Pluto is a better card for a lot of archetypes. You don't see it here because I think it's less necessary. Some of the Ruby pairings make it a little bit less so, and people are going to be challenging into locations. Pluto can't block locations in any kind of way, so no Pluto here, but it certainly could be warranting the inclusion. I want to try other 4-cost cards out. So don't be surprised if at some point in time you see this deck shift where you see either the Captain Amalia, not Amalia, that's for a different game, and that's something that I'm sad about. But anyway, Captain Amelia, and Donald Duck are the 4-cost cards of choice here. Donald Duck really didn't see much play. There is another variation with the same exact effect from set 1. There's a Mulan that costs 5 in Ruby. That's a 4/5 that has the same exact text as Donald Duck as far as the ability. When you challenge something and banish it, your other characters get +1 lore. Donald Duck never really saw his day. He exists in a very odd space where he doesn't really do much, doesn't really challenge well. He costs more than Mimfox, so the kind of check of does it survive a Mimfox or trade with it thing doesn't really apply as well to characters that are just costing more. That's more of one that costs less that you kind of want to look at, or about the same. 3 3s and 3 2s. If you notice, every character in this deck does have the ability to survive everyone, I should say, that costs more than 2 has the ability to survive a Mimfox hit. Captain Amelia does have some other abilities, so it's not really one that I care too much about questing with all the time. It can, but we'll see. But the rest of the deck here, Minnie Mouse, Pirate Lookout, one of the more impressive cards in the set, and one of the real benefits to playing Ruby. People will say that, oh, you're just bringing back locations, aren't even very good, but you really need to look at it as a different type of card. It's not just a card that draws you a specific card. You'll notice the locations that are played in this deck are all inkable. So really what it does is a self-fulfilling ink engine. You just pick up locations that may have died early, bought you some time, they attacked into it. You didn't really need them, but you played them to then pick up later and make sure your opponent doesn't quest out too much too early. And then you just play them as ink. And when you play them as ink, you get to pick up another one. And you keep going and you keep going. You can get to your later cost cards and you get to play all the cards you draw instead of have to choose between inking and not inking and fueling your docks for really late game plays. So Minnie Mouse, an amazing card, one of the better Ruby cards. I would say it's probably my second best Ruby card in the set that we play. Maui is still down below. I think, honestly, it's going to be Moana, Minnie Mouse, Wendy, then Maui Shark. As far as the cards I think you're going to see the most play are the most powerful the ones. Obviously, Minnie Mouse and Wendy being uninkable is holding them back a little bit. Either of those being inkable, clearly the best cards in the set for me, Wendy and Minnie Mouse. But we do have, again, going back to some of the initial cards there, a lot more pirates in this deck. We have Mr. Smee, we have John Silver, we have Captain Amelia, Donald Duck, Moana, and Moana, of course, both Moanas. One of the interesting things with this deck is that the bigger Moana has the ability to, of course, move a lot of small characters, which you're kind of trying to do. 2 locations, kind of having that big lore burst at the end there. It is something you can do even with very few characters in play. Say you have just the ability late in game, because we did use Minnie Mouse to just ink a bunch and get things back. You eventually bring back a Bayou, play the Bayou, and then play a Moana from your hand, whether it be for 7 or however many you may have gotten to with the Minnie Mouse drawing a bunch of extra ink. And just move 2 things there. Play it, gain 2 lore, totally fine. Big character too, 6/5. It'll only quest for 1, but we hopefully got some more chip shots in early. Captain Amelia can be challenged by characters that are pirates that will come up. There are quite a few pirates in the set that we'll see play. Having a character that doesn't die or being challenged by Smee is pretty important. Opposing John Silvers or anything like that we may see come up. Certainly the text on Amelia is nothing to scoff at, and giving everything else that's being challenged resist. Really hard to deal with. It makes a lot of things kind of go past certain breakpoints there. Nothing really survives the Fox tests except for Donald Duck in that scenario, so maybe Donald Duck gets a little bit better because having resist 1 on defense means that it doesn't trade with Mimfox and you get to keep doing its thing. But no, I do like how aggressive this deck can be. Skull Rock, buffing your character's strength to make it so that they're able to take down locations on the enemy side easier, get through resist on certain characters. Just being a reasonable card. Also buff through Sisu. A lot of the characters, you don't want to get Ice Block Sisu ever, or even Ice Block Medusa. Putting your John Silver out of Medusa range is pretty strong. Of course, Ice Block is a card, and it can help shrink it, but I don't know how much we're going to see of Ice Block. I feel like the format's getting a lot faster. We're dirtling around and trying to put together all these pieces. It's going to be a little bit more difficult than it was before. I'm trying a lot of different Ruby Sapphire decks because I do recognize the strength of it, how popular it has been over the course of the past year, and how strong it can be. And under no delusion that it's a powerful deck. Or not a powerful deck. It is a powerful deck. And it's really just knowing how you have to combat that kind of deck, whether it be taking a more aggressive stance with Amber Steel like we saw the previous format, or with cards like Skull Rock, help buff your characters out of range. And no removal here on the front side or the face value of the deck, no copies of Storm, Strength, Baboom, anything like that. Really relying on 7 Dwarves Mind for this deck. Again, one of the biggest cards I think that was underplayed in the previous format, namely because we didn't have as much time or as many events as we may have liked before we wanted to kind of rip our hair out in the face of Ruby Sapphire. But all being said here, I think this is getting to the point where it's a well enough oiled machine. You can include more locations. You can add things like RLS Legacy and Jim Hawkins. I really wanted to allude towards more of the pirate theme than anything else here with this kind of deck. but John Silver will certainly improve with the more locations you put in your deck. And cards like Arliss Legacy is a fine inclusion. This deck is not too restrictive on inkables. There's only 12. They're all cards that cost 2, but I really want to make sure that Dock was being able to be played and played out when need be, when you just need to refuel your hand and keep on going. So I guess there's 16 Minnie Mouse. I lied. No more inkables in this deck. Got to cut something on inkable to make room for Arliss Legacy. So that's the main inclusion, the reason for that inclusion there. But a lot of answers, again, to Diablo. Happy with Skull Rock. Can also get through a Diablo while, turn 2, you can go Happy into Wendy Darling, while that, on the face of it, Diablo can't really do much about that, or even on a Hidden Cove, making Wendy or Happy, in some instances with Skull Rock, be buffed because of being able to be played and used on turn 3 with only 1 cost to move to Skull Rock. Letting you challenge Diablo is very important. Most decks are going to have a difficult time functioning through a Diablo. It is still one of the primary threats to have to deal with. It's not the end-all be-all. It's not the best card in the game. It's just a very powerful card that you just need to make sure you're aware of when you build your decks. But that's the Ruby Sapphire Pirates, or Ruby Steel Pirates. There's a ton of different ways to build it. I'm interested to see all the ways that people try and what comes through as the best archetypes there. We have enough captains, we have enough pirates, we have just enough. I think we're missing maybe one more good location for pirates to really be a thing, because one of the flagship cards of pirates really is the John Silver that gets buffed, resist and lore wise for each location. But as of now, we're still playing cards like Bayou, and Skull Rock isn't the most impressive, but it's still a fine card. But we're really missing about one card for it to be amazing. You can try the Jolly Roger, but again, the uninkable count is getting a little high, and it is a fine card. It does make all of your characters pretty important, like pretty hard to get through. It makes maybe Donald Duck a little bit better too, because giving it rush when you get the triggered ability is nice. But this is where I landed on for now. I could certainly see different ways to take it. Calhoun maybe isn't needed, but I think it's a powerful enough card you want to give it a try. So next up here on one of our new brews, deck number 8. Revisiting an old favorite of mine. So I took some deck like this in the previous format and expanded upon other people's versions of it, where we're using the Robin Hood Sharpshooter, I believe, the 1/4 Robin Hood uninkable, which is a pretty tall order for a 4-cost 1/4 that pretty much dies to everything you want to put at it, and put it into a deck where you're really trying to utilize its ability to quest multiple times in the turn. What's the best way to defend your characters? Well, Bodyguard is a cute way, but you're really at the mercy of what your opponent can do. But the best way to really kill to protect your characters is just to kill all of your opponents, force them to have rush characters or actions of their own to really keep things going there. So we've paired Robin Hood with a ton of removal. I never really did any kind of deck tech for this deck. I think I went over a lot of the details of it to begin with, but in just a random Dreamborn kind of link for it there. But we have actions. We're playing Emerald, since some of the best cards to make sure that our things live are discard effects. Sudden Chill and Hypnotize really being some of the key ones, which are a whole part of an engine that really takes advantage of your opponent discarding cards. So Diablo works with a ton of actions, and some of our actions are uninkable. So we wanted to make sure that we had some use for them in that way. Diablo being a pretty easy inclusion. One of the inclusions that may not be obvious to begin with is Mulan. So Mulan is a card, the 6-cost one that's not really seen as much play as we thought it would. I honestly thought it would be one of the best and meta-defining cards that existed in the game. It's just relatively easy to play around is the thing. You see a Mulan, you make sure that there's no way for you to get kind of blown out by it. It really is not the greatest into Ruby Sapphire. One of the biggest reasons it's not doing well, and also against Diablo. It kind of fails both the being good against Diablo and Ruby Sapphire tests, which is why it hasn't really seen much play. However, the 2-cost Mulan is fine. The 2-cost one in this deck, where we're looking to just play a bunch of actions either off of our Robin Hood or sing them or just play them for value like a Brawl. Sure, 2 costs that can challenge for 3. So certainly a fine card. We've seen Prince Eric do well, and also being a shift target is great. Ursula, I'm not going to even mention. Should be in probably every Emerald deck that exists in the game. And Robin Hood. All right, quickly to the Robin Hood package. There's a ton of cards, right? There's a package in quotes. I believe the package is removal spells. Just kill your opponent's things. We have some new actions, which we'll touch on here. As you can see, this deck's kind of split between actions on bottom and non-actions on top. Heffalumps and Wozels. So it is a song that draws a card, costs 2, and it makes it so your opponent can't quest. One of the biggest things that this kind of discard decks have issues with is deck cards like Tamatoa and cards like Harem Flavorsham, where they get out of control, or they get down at a time where you can't really answer them too well. You need an extra turn to get from 4 to 5 or 5 to 6, depending on what you're trying to do to take care of them. And Heffalumps, even good against some of the aggressive decks, just buys you a turn. Character can't quest for a turn, draw a card. Similar to the Give Reckless for a turn draw card, but I think costing 2 and being able to be sung with Mulan or Ursula is pretty important. So that's why I have that over the Give Reckless draw card action that we could be playing in some ways. Sudden Chill and Hypnotize, kind of a package to make your opponent discard cards. We have no Ursula to sing Sudden Chill twice or Heffalumps twice because there's not as many songs, more so just action-based. But emptying your opponent's hand at a key turn, and Hypnotize just drawing cards as well. Pretty important. Clearing the way for some of our later game threats, which we're going to get to here, is one of Emerald's things. That's why cards like Beast Tragic Hero see so much play in Green Steel. While a card that's pretty hard to keep in play, what Green Steel tries to do is empty your opponent's cards in the hand so that cards like that can stick, and when they stick, they're amazing. So we're trying to follow a similar suit with a card like Robin Hood. It's a little bit cheaper to play Robin Hood and can kind of self-fulfill its own generation of effects, and definitely warrants a slot here, I think, to just try and make sure that they have no cards in the hand. One of the newer cards, and cards I've tried in different decks too, combining with cards like Mufasa to get a bunch of ink back, is You Came Back. Only 2 copies here because while, yes, in theory, you could Robin Hood, You Came Back, Robin Hood, You Came Back, Robin Hood, You Came Back, since you can ready it over and keep questing, since there's no restriction on You Came Back. It's not typically as good as, unless you hit multiples, as just hitting a Pirate's Life, because you're really just gaining the lore of Robin Hood with the You Came Back, since you're not getting a card out of the deal that does anything, just more lore. It is a good inclusion. In some cases there, it can help close the game with cards like Pete, Bad Guy, which we'll also get to here. Just the 4 lore burst twice is really big. And also Maui. Maui Half Shark gets action back when it challenges, so it can be used to challenge, get You Came Back, and then play it, challenge again, get it back again. Not necessarily infinite because you have to challenge each time, but you do gain that passive lore from Maui, which can be nice. Help clear a large board, much like Scar did, the 7-cost Scar, which could ready itself when it banished challengers. A lot of versatility in the card. You can use it on Mulan to challenge twice if it's been shifted or anything like that, where you can get huge blowouts of damage there to your opponent and just really devastate their board. A little bit flexible of a card. It is discardable to Diablo, one of the main reasons it's okay to include. The uninkable count in this deck's pretty reasonable. It's not terribly high. I believe we are at 13, not too much there. It's still a reasonable amount where you can ink most things and have some flexibility in what you can do with your turns. Brawl really needing no explanation. We don't talk about Bruno as well. Pretty good removal in both colors, and we're even going up to Dragonfire. Sometimes we don't talk about Bruno against the Tamatoa. You have to cross your fingers because there's a card or 2 in hand. But sometimes there's nothing like a clean answer. Dragonfire your opponent's thing, be done with it. Nothing else to do. A really good hit with Diablo or with Robin Hood, since it can just answer anything, and you don't have to think about it. The card's just gone. They don't have to potentially replay it, like a Tinkerbell maybe. If you pick it up and they already hit your Diablo once and you don't have to have them do it again, just get rid of it, banish it. It's gone. It's done. We're done with this. Fine cards to play, and I found actually Dragonfire overperform when I've tried decks like this before. And Pirate's Life, you do want to help close the game. Robin Hood does put the cards to your discard, and you are drawing extra cards with Diablo, so you do see a lot of cards per turn. You can see upwards of 6 cards a turn within effects, and sometimes you get to the point where you really just need to end the game. Maui, Half Shark, and Pirate's Life, while Maui can sing it, and that's fine and dandy, just the extra lore from Maui that its ability gains when you play an action, you gain a lore, and Pirate's Life, 6 costs for 3 lore isn't that bad. So again, all depends on the situation and how aggressive you're able to be, how controlling you can be, how quickly you can close the door. I've easily gotten into situations where I've wanted to control the board as much as I could over and over again, got to 14, 15 lore, and then played a Pirate's Life, got it back with Maui Shark, and then played it again for 5 lore. Not in the same turn, but over the course of 2 turns is enough when you're taking 2 of their lore away. And Maui Half Shark, again, one of the more interesting cards to try in this deck, one of the newer cards that I've really enjoyed giving some time to. Again, I've tried it in versions like this, and in decks that powered up a bit early, the Sapphire decks. This has been more impressive of the ones. I think it's paired pretty well with discard to make sure that your opponent doesn't get to keep playing the game. Being able to pick up, we don't talk about Bruno or Dragonfire over and over again is nice. Making your opponent have to discard cards is great, and all while gaining lore in the meantime. Pete, Bad Guy, is a card that is just something that's really hard to deal with for a lot of decks, against Ruby Sapphire specifically. You just need something that sticks in play no matter what they do, except if they be prepared to, of course, or play Lady Tremaine, which hasn't really been played in Ruby Sapphire in quite a while. But it is kind of guaranteed lore in a way. It can sing. We don't talk about Bruno or any of the smaller songs there, but it is a really good burst of lore when you're able to play it. The following turn, maybe play Heffalumps and something else, then quest with it, and then play You Came Back, quest with it again, gain 8 lore. Big swing at the end of the game again. We're really trying to close the game quickly once we've established some sort of control. And Mulan, of course, a little bit of board control, a little bit of threat. More, you need 4. You don't really need 4 in this deck, but I like to have the threat of doing it a lot. And sometimes when my opponent, sees me ink them, or they see put to the discard from Robin Hood, they may think there's not that many left. So 4 is fine. It could easily be a different inkable card there, 1 or 2 copies of it. But I like having the threat of it. It's not going to happen too often, but maybe 1 or 2 times, 2 out of 10, maybe 1 in 5 games. You'll have the ability to move on someone, and it'll be great. But yeah, that's this deck. Kind of an update on a previous version, which had Clarabells and things like that. But again, trying out Maui Shark as our kind of card draw late game engine, and you came back and Heffalumps to kind of buy some time. Pretty sweet stuff going on here. One of my favorite decks I've played in this format. I've had some time to play test against some friends there, proxying up cards and seeing how they play out, and it's been a lot of fun. Next up here, a crowd favorite, and the only deck list I have that takes up 3 lines of Dreamborn. Amethyst Steel. This is kind of the Tinkerbell package I'm going to go through here. So we've seen decks like this kind of struggle a little bit here and there with finding their mark, and it's been rightfully so. It's a deck that kind of fuses some decks together, namely an Amethyst deck that is trying to play Pete and Smee to be aggressive. That's its main strengths. But it got a new tool this set, Tinkerbell. I don't mean the steel one. That's had the option to play that one before, and it's been fine. But the 3-cost Tinkerbell, functionally a Surfer mini, but kind of color shifted and also character shifted. Having a shift target for the giant fairy is pretty impressive there, especially one with more than 2 toughness, 2 willpower, I should say. Sorry, it is something that helps the deck get aggressive, and with the addition of cards like Tinkerbell and Genie, those 2 cards, this deck used to have a big problem with questing. It has Ruby Amethyst and Amethyst Steel both had a pretty big issue closing the game. Ruby Amethyst had Queen's Castle and be prepared to help make it so that they could play with their food a bit more and take some time. But what this deck does a little bit differently is it doesn't establish full control or ever really threaten to sweep the board up. It always, kind of plays with a bit of light control elements to help close the board game, tries to hang on to the end of it, and then try and get a little aggressive. And now we have a really insane curve of Smee into Tinkerbell into Genie to really get the lore going. All 2 lore characters and all really, really capable of closing games out. Pretty hard to answer for any deck that's not packing cards like Strength of the Raging Fire, Be Prepared, Brawl, things of that nature. But a big few additions there in Genie and Tinkerbell, giving them evasive threats. We see Calhoun here as well. There's a couple copies of Cogsworth can give cards like that rush in addition to the big Tinkerbell if it's not shifted. Letting you kind of charge in there, get a Tinkerbell trigger right away can be completely devastating, much like a Mulan from the previous deck we saw. Late in the game, comes down, wipes their opponent's board, nothing like it. You'll see here I favored Genie over Merlin Rabbit. I do think that's going to be a commonality we'll see. I think that Genie is a better card inherently. Obviously, the Rabbit does a lot more as far as grinding elements and playing a much later game. That's no question. However, Genie is a threat in of itself. Often Rabbits can go ignored, except in mirror matches where you're trying to mitigate the amount of draw they'll have. Genie does let you kind of play this game where you're being a little bit aggressive, maintaining board presence, and kind of keeping the game going. I expect to see Genie in tons of decks, and again, I do think in most versions of decks I've had that have Amethyst, it does eclipse the amount of Rabbits I've had in my deck. So solid card, super thrilled to see it here. We're going to move down a little bit here because some of the cards we've talked about, some we haven't. Tinkerbell, again, just an evasive threat. I do think that this deck was lacking in evasive threats. It has enough kind of stuff to do, card draw and removal. We see Friends the Other Side, which Tinkerbell can sing very well. Same thing with Strength of the Raging Fire. Another reason for the inclusion of a evasive 3-drop is that it lets you sing pretty well. Strength of the Raging Fire has not always been in decks like this. Typically, they've been on the Friends/Zeus plan plus some locations. I've decided to eschew locations for now because I think, again, the format may have gotten a bit more aggressive, and I want to maintain the fact that I actually get to use my card draw when I want it. So that's why we see Finders Keepers here. It has proven to be pretty great in Ruby Amethyst. Again, typically because of the fact that it's playing Be Prepared, it can take time off to play cards like Finders Keepers and still be threatening enough to where they don't have your opponent just throw their entire hand on the table with the big tempo loss by playing Finders Keepers. But a couple copies here to help refill when you're low on resources is pretty great. Not too many different things here, not too many innovations. Again, we could see a lot of different things happen with this type of deck. There's a couple captains here in Captain Hook for Mr. Smee. Not too many you really need because you have the ability to pick it back up with Mim and Snake and Fox. Pete, of course, here to kind of slow down any kind of Be Prepared decks. And yeah, Elsa, tap things down, get the challenge going. Great in all the Amethyst shells. But yes, this is an archetype which I think has a lot of room, and every time I look at this color pair, it always feels like it should have the answers for everything because it has a good mix of card draw and a lot of really great removal, and now a good threat base, and that's really what it was lacking, was the ability to close the game quickly. On paper, these do look like the best decks, in my opinion. They really have it all. They have the card draw and the removal package that you look for steel. Amber kind of generates that same kind of card draw, but to a lesser extent for Amber Steel. And Ruby generates more of the kind of sweeping, threatening effects like Maui and Be Prepared on that side. So kind of mishing them together is usually a recipe for a good time. But we'll see how this one plays out. I do expect a lot of people to experiment with decks like this. And I've tried decks like this one specifically, much more location-based decks, again with the Happy, Dock, Dwarven Mine package, even with Queen's Castle, Library, and John Silver. That was a deck, I think, late at the end of the last format that kind of came through eventually. Definitely another viable deck there. Definitely one that'll include Genie, I believe. But this is just one take on it, and I do think that this one, a more mid-range deck, could see play, and it's certainly one I want to try out. All right, we got one more deck here, and this one is probably not the color pair you're thinking. Again, we're going with off meta here, and this is one of my favorite kind of brews that I've come through with, inspired by a lot of different people and a lot of different ideas that I wanted to experiment with here. So Mufasa, one of my favorite cards in the game, is Mufasa, the Amber Mufasa, I should specify here. And we're taking it into a whole new direction here. We're going with Sapphire. Sapphire got some of the best cards in the set, while we're not seeing some of the premier ones like Sail of the Azurite Sea, which again I think is the best Sapphire card in the game now, not really finding a home in Mufasa decks. We're kind of utilizing some of the support mechanics and also some of the new shift lines that do exist in this color pair. So what am I talking about? Well, we see Lilo here because Lilo is amazing. It is just going to be in most Sapphire or most Amber decks, I think, going forward, as a card that just is a threat. Inkable, all the above. Dale. So Dale is a 3-cost 3/4, kind of going down the line across the board here. 3-cost 3/4 enters Exerted unless you have a chip. There's no chips. However, a 3-cost 3/4 does pass the Fox test, meaning that it's just going to be trading with at worst, and in most cases when your opponent plays a Fox, they have to pick another character up, so it's kind of at parity with what it's doing. We do, however, at this point, just want something in play that's named Dale, and we'll get to that in a little bit. And we have the Alice package. There were 2 copies of Alice, 2 different Alices here. The I can't even remember the name. Is Grinning Girl or the Sailor, whatever they are. 2 different 1/4 Alices for 3. One's inkable, one's not. Both are great. So support Alice. We'll go with support Alice. There aren't too many high cost characters or high strength characters, but there are a little bit. One of the key things we're trying to do with this Alice here, and if you look back to the beginning of the screen here, the Queen, is make use of World's Greatest Criminal Mind. Basil, the Queen, and Alice are all enablers to support. Now, why does support matter with World's Greatest Criminal Mind? Well, support, you don't have to choose your own characters. You can choose your opponents. And if you ever choose your opponent's characters, making them more than 5 strength, well, World's Greatest Criminal Mind can function as an unconditional removal spell that costs 3 and is inkable. Pretty great card in that sense. There are some instances, of course, with high strength characters, maybe like the Queen, which if the Queen gets support, it actually gives 8 strength to something of yours, can make Alice, I think it's Growing Girl, the ability to quest for 5, which is an amazing feat. And speaking of Alices that love to quest, we have Alice Savvy Sailor. I'm pretty sure it's Savvy Sailor. I'm going to go with that one. Again, one of the most amazing cards I think in this set. There's no real bodyguards to help protect this one, but having ward and your ability to kind of flood the board, making it difficult for your opponent to challenge everything, certainly enough to, I think, make it see play. There are some cards we want to get to which were worth protecting. One of the big ones, which kind of paired with the Dale we talked about earlier, Chippendale. The Shift Chippendale is one of my favorite cards from this expansion. It's just an amazingly high upside card. Functionally, I would say has a cost of 6. It has shift 5, but you really want to play it and be able to play an ink immediately so that you get the ability to return any character from your discard to your hand, and it's a repeatable effect every time that happens. I believe it's only during your turn, so it doesn't really work with Tadashi, but Tadashi does help get you to that late point in the game, which is why Tadashi is here, even though on the surface it doesn't really work with the support theme, doesn't really work with some of the minor hero theme, which we see with Anna. There's a lot of heroes in this deck. I think that Basil, Lilo, Piglet, Anna, Dale, Alice, Rapunzel, Baymax, Stitch, and Dale are all heroes, so 2-cost Anna really making its kind of debut here as one of the easier cards to work with hero-wise. We don't see the 4-cost one here. I did have the 4-cost Anna that makes all your heroes gain more lore, but I think it's a little bit too fragile, even with Alice protecting it. Not quite worth the inclusion. Maybe you could Maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh on it. Maybe you can remove Tadashi and just go with that. But I really like Tadashi, and I think it's a really important card for decks like this that want to get to bigger ink cards but not utilize all the cards in their hand, so they can't keep up with some of the decks that just draw cards raw pretty well. Rapunzel and Mufasa, no introduction needed. We're playing 56 characters, so Mufasa is going to get the in here. Some of our characters are quite large as well. Rapunzel, as you can see, we have cards like Anna, we have Dale, Alice. Those are all high willpower cards. It means Rapunzel has a lot of targets it can choose from as far as what it can do to heal. Never going to be a shortage of that here, where some decks, even like the Steel Song decks, sometimes had a bit difficult time drawing more than 2 cards with Rapunzel. This one's one of the best Rapunzel decks I can imagine. And speaking of healing, your character is getting a benefit out of it. Baymax is a 2/6. There's a giant amount of text on that card. Basically, whenever you play it or when you quest with it, you can heal up to 2 damage and you gain lore for each thing you healed. More kind of into the high willpower theme here we have going on. A lot of different cards you can heal. And it's just another way to kind of help close the game. There was no real way for this color pair to gain a lot of lore out of nowhere. And while it's not a lot, 2 is, over time, 1 or 2 times, man, you can, if you get a Baymax, play it, and then you get the turn back and can heal again. That's 6 lore in total between the 2 turns. It's very, very, doable to close games out that way. Stitch, Carefree Surfer, gets a little bit of a nod there. It's not one of the best cards or necessary cards for this deck, but it is just a big thing to hit off of a Mufasa, as well as a good character to play if you've gotten a bunch of ink and have some small characters haven't been drawn in the mid to late game. And of course, Chippendale does need something to bring back, so it can bring back Stitches, Baymaxes, Mufasas, Rapunzels. I don't really know what gets better than that. Chippendale is one of my favorite cards. I think it's going to see some play. It may not be specifically this deck if this deck doesn't quite pan out, but I imagine some version of Chippendale is going to make an appearance. It is a very powerful card. Maybe in conjunction with cards like Gaston, which cheapen the cost of it by 2, so that the shift comes down pretty quickly. But we do have enough things, I think, where we're right at the cusp of a card like that really seeing play, and it is quite large. 6/6 with 3 lore. It's actually the same as a Chernabog, I believe. I think that's a 9/9, but it is quite large and does have a very relevant ability that can happen almost immediately. You think of it as a giant Hades, so 6/6 Hades for 5 or 6. 9 if you're unlucky and don't have the ability to shift it out at all. You just get to eat ink, play Chippendale, then play your 9th ink, and then get something back. Pretty good value. Maybe you can get another copy of Chippendale, kind of loop them forever is a nice feeling here, but certainly a deck I'm sure no one was really putting on their radar, but it's something I really want to try out. I think there's a lot of potential here. Alice protecting Chippendale for a full turn, and if they kill the Alice when you use it to protect Chippendale, well, you just play an ink and get the Chippendale back. There's some argument to maybe playing some cards that add ink to your inkwell to trigger cards like Chippendale more, like Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck, but I think that this is enough. You don't really need to focus in on that part. I think more so Tadashi is going to do pretty good work. Your opponent can't let it just quest forever, and if they ever do kill it, then you get 2 ink out of the deal. Puts itself to the inkwell immediately, and regardless of what you choose, but the top card always goes straight there. So these have been the decks here. This is one of my favorite ones. I'm definitely going to try this one out here pretty shortly, actually, once I get everything together. It doesn't require too many new cards. There's the Alice and the Baymax, but the other ones are just rares, and definitely Alice and Baymax are my cards I want to pick up anyway because they're a lot of fun. Who doesn't like big effects on Sapphire cards that aren't really Ruby Sapphire decks as a whole? So hope you guys enjoyed this. Let me know what your favorite deck was for this, and any kind of color pairs that I may have not gone through. If you have a brew for it, let me know in the comments, and we'll chat soon. Again, getting everything ready for the European Championships, and as well as the Pixelborn Connect Europe versus North America Challenge that we're going to go through each other. I think it's 8v8. I don't know the exact structure of it, but let's hope for the best there, and I'll figure out what I'm going to play soon. But until next time, thanks everyone.